Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to our Newsweek Horizons event, where tonight we will answer the question, is artificial intelligence a climate hero or climate villain? AI has quickly become a revolutionary force in many areas of society, business, and research, including the effort to fight climate change. However, data centers that make AI possible require enormous amounts of energy, and their growing demand for power is pushing emissions of greenhouse gases higher. Please join us in a warm round of applause in welcoming Newsweek's Chief Strategy Officer, Diane Kandapa.
Good evening, and on behalf of our CEO, Dev Bragad, our Global Editor-in-Chief, Nancy Cooper, and the entire team at Newsweek, welcome. Welcome to this Newsweek Horizons event. Firstly, a thank you to our sponsors this evening, Kia, a company that shows us every day how you can make the planet better simply by leading with purpose. Welcome also to another Climate Week event. I'm sure you've been to at least one other. You know, Climate Week is taking place this year in a nation that is facing a pretty intense political moment. And this week, we are in the city that is at the heart of some pretty fevered global diplomacy. I don't know if you've noticed, but most of the politics and much of the diplomacy has very little to do with the climate crisis. That may be a good thing, because the serious conversation with people who are seriously focused on solutions, that's now taking place in forums just like this one. Now, of course, there are a lot of these conversations taking place across New York City this week, hundreds of them, and in fact, a very large number, a dozen or more, have the theme AI and climate. I must confess that in this building, there was an AI and climate event 2 floors below us that finished just half an hour before we started here. Now, if you chose this event over that one, congratulations. You made the right decision. You know, 2 floors up, the view is just so much better. But what's this thing about Newsweek and Horizons? Well, we believe that in order to fully appreciate what lies over the horizon, you do need to take a step back and gain some perspective. For Newsweek, and we've been in print for 92 years, and here we are hosting an event about thinking machines, we kind of know a little bit about reinventing yourself. We understand that technology can sometimes deliver dazzling breakthroughs, but that's not the limit of the definition of innovation. That sometimes that means taking a fresh look at an old problem in search of a new solution. This evening, you'll probably hear about the nuclear power plant at 3 Mile Island. Once the dazzling energy source of a smog-free future. Then, the emblem of environmental catastrophe. And today, possibly the solution for a technology that could change the future of the planet. We're kind of hoping that our perspectives, those of our editors and our panelists, will help you to just get a little bit of a peek over what lies ahead of our horizon. Welcome once again to Newsweek's Horizons event, and we hope you enjoy the view. Thank you very much.
Now it's time for our conversation with leading experts to discuss AI, climate change, hero or climate villain. Please join us in welcoming to tonight's panel as we begin. Executive Vice President and Chief Impact Officer at Salesforce, Suzanne DiBianca. Managing Director, ESG and Sustainability at Duke Energy, Heather Quinley. Assistant Professor at MIT, Priya Danti. Vice President of Energy at Microsoft, Bobby Hollis. Director of AI and Data Strategies at Bezos Earth Fund, Aman Ramashariki. And tonight's moderator, Environmental and Sustainability Governance Editor at Newsweek, Jeff Young.
Well, thank you, everyone, and special thanks to our panelists. I think we're going to have a lovely conversation this evening, certainly a timely conversation. And I think we're going to get right into this issue by launching with something that's been in the news lately. And Bobby, I'm going to start with you, because your company, Microsoft, made some news on Friday with this power purchase agreement with Constellation to potentially reopen one of the most famous, some might say infamous, nuclear power stations in the country. Tell me about this agreement.
So for us, a lot of the conversation, you already heard it a little bit in the preamble, is focused on how do we make sure that what we're doing still aligns to our sustainability objectives. And so we've been very public about looking at energy as a real effort to find decarbonization and carbon-free energy across our entire portfolio. AI has accelerated and increased the need for carbon-free energy, so that requires us to look outside the box. And that box for us means looking at some of the technologies that have been there for a long period of time. The Crane Energy Facility is a great example. It's a Pennsylvania energy resource that ran through 2019, had an incredible operation record, and had the ability to deliver carbon-free energy, but the economics of intermittent renewable power coming in pushed some of that baseload carbon-free energy that we all really need to see back online now off of the grid. And so this is an opportunity for us to really look at the entire portfolio of carbon-free energy options that we can bring to the equation. Some of that will be new technology, looking at things like SMRs. It's a huge part of the discussion, looking at all kinds of different elements of technology that we can use to increase efficiency, but also looking at the resources that are actually there now that we maybe aren't thinking about. And this was a perfect example for us.
Great. So the Crane Center, that's the new name. The old name that people are probably more familiar with, 3 Mile Island, as Diane indicated there. Symbolically, I know that it's a different reactor. This isn't the reactor that suffered the accident in '79, but the symbolism of bringing this particular power plant back online after it was closed, that reactor was closed for economic reasons 5 years ago. Talk to me about that, about the symbolism of bringing that back. Is this an indicator of nuclear's resurgence, thanks in part to demand from data centers?
Well, we're hoping that there will be a nuclear resurgence that looks at both the existing fleet of opportunities. That facility ran for so many years, well after that particular incident with a completely different unit. And the ability to deliver that carbon-free energy source with reliability, and also Constellation is a great partner. We know that they have an incredible safety record. So knowing that we have that kind of a partner on the other side of the table gives us the ability to look at that particular option and know that that's part of the portfolio that we want to bring to the equation and make sure that it is part of solving our energy needs and our carbon-free objectives, especially for 2030.
Super. Now, you alluded to this, but I want to pull this out and focus on it a bit more, and that is the energy consumption associated with the data centers and the emissions that might come along with the expansion of data centers for AI. Microsoft has seen roughly a 30% increase in emissions over the past 4 years, I think. Is the boom in AI knocking you off of your climate target trajectory?
I don't think it's knocking us off. When we set our ambition, it was ambition, and it was something that we knew would be difficult. It would be a stretch, and we wanted to really put something out there that we knew would help to be industry leading and to really push a conversation faster and more aggressively. So whether AI was part of the discussion, we knew that technology, and in particular, our line of business, would require us to really come up with creative solutions, and that it would grow quickly. AI means it's growing slightly more quickly than we expected, but also if you look back, this has been something that we've seen in the technology sector many times. When you look at the move to cloud, a lot of the discussion around moving from data centers on-prem, as they call it, on-premises, into the cloud, the conversation at that point looked very, very similar to what we're hearing with AI. what you saw was a drive for efficiency that really resulted in the ability to find all kinds of savings that reduced that energy consumption from what that forecast looked like. We see the same thing happening in the AI conversation, is the drive for efficiency that's taking place behind the scenes with us, with all of our partners, our suppliers, to make sure that as we deploy, it's the smallest footprint it can possibly be, and then we solve it with the carbon-free energy sources that we need. It's absolutely something that we knew would be a challenge, whether it was AI or whether it was just the expansion of cloud. There would be a huge opportunity for us to really find ways of helping to challenge and partner with new technologies, utilities, different partners to really kind of revisit a paradigm that's been somewhat challenged to find the opportunities to bring in those new carbon-free resources.
Thank you. Heather, I want to turn to you next. I can see you down there. So you and your colleagues at Duke are, of course, tasked with meeting the demand for energy from the technology sector, but also from the resurgence of manufacturing that we're seeing in the country, in some parts of the country, the electrification of more appliances in homes, charging all those EVs that we want to sell to people. That's a lot of demand for electricity. Give me a sense of the kind of demand increase that Duke is anticipating.
Jeff, thanks for having us. I'm Heather Quinley with Duke Energy. For those who don't know us, we serve electric and gas customers, 8.4 million in the Southeast and Midwest on the electric side, 1.7 on the gas side. And the challenge is real. We have a clean energy ambition, net zero by 2050 for our carbon emissions, with intermediate goals in 2030 around scope 1, 2, and 3, intermediate goals for scope 2 and 3 in 2035. So this is how we measure and hold ourselves accountable for that clean energy transition. Meanwhile, what we're seeing is our customers are experiencing significant load growth. Last year was one of the most significant years in the company's history, with adding 200,000 new customers. And we're seeing significant load growth from data centers and advanced manufacturing, as you flagged. For data centers in the next few years, they will account for 25% of our new projects, and advanced manufacturing, EVs, batteries, semiconductors, et cetera, will account for about 2/3. So what we know is that our emissions trajectory, we are still on the path for net zero, and for our 2030 ambition, we are trending towards our 50% reduction goal. We're at 48% reduction right now against 2005, but there will be fluctuations in those emissions. There will be ebbs and flows as we experience this growth. But the growth is significant. It's significant for economic development, for our customers, and that's our homework assignment, is to meet the clean energy ambition.
So Duke has proposed a sort of special arrangement, memorandum of understanding, I guess, with some big consumers of electricity to come up with a creative financing to make sure you're meeting that energy demand with clean electrons. Tell me about that.
Yeah, that's something new, Jeff, that we've developed, is the Accelerating Clean Energy Memorandum of Understanding with Microsoft, Google, Amazon, Nucor, and it's really to meet the challenge to develop clean energy on-site generation, whether that's nuclear, renewables, and the Memorandum of Understanding includes a clean transition tariff, where we're going to be working to creatively design rates that help accelerate the transition, meet the on-site demand for customers, and meets the needs for customers at the commercial and industrial level, as well as residential level. So this is very exciting for us to think creatively, help our customers grow. It's economic development for our communities as well.
Suzanne, a lot of this, whether AI turns out to be hero or villain or somewhere in between, is going to rest on how we apply AI. And I know Salesforce has developed a policy around how you pursue energy for data centers, how you apply AI. Tell me a bit about that.
Sure. Thank you for having me, Jeff. I want to applaud the work of Microsoft and of Duke. I think if we don't all set incredibly ambitious goals that we don't, sometimes know exactly how we're going to get there, we won't rise to meet the challenge that's ahead of us. So better to set a really ambitious goal, get all the way there, most of the way there, then to set sort of an incremental goal and meet it. So just really commend you for your efforts. We are not a hyperscaler. We don't own our own data centers. We're renters. We have some first-party data centers. So we do work very closely with our partners to make sure that those are running as efficiently as possible. And what I'll say is we are building LLMs, but what our mantra is you don't need to know how to write poetry to solve an issue in healthcare. So the models that you're seeing today are massive models. They're requiring a lot of compute power, and you don't always need that much energy in your compute power when you're trying to solve like a front office issue. So Salesforce, as an apps company, is building in an agent layer into our platform, which is really taking sophisticated data sets, but those that are relevant to healthcare. So we're thinking a lot about it. It's one of our policy principles, is to build LLMs in a way that uses the maximum amount of information with the least amount of energy. We also work closely with our first-party data centers and locate them in areas that have high levels of renewable energy on the grid, like the Pacific Northwest. And we think also a lot about efficient hardware that we use and we buy. So for us, this is sort of a scope 3 issue, but our ambition includes scope 3 and has since the very beginning. So we have something we've called the supplier exhibit. I've actually given it to a lot of our customers, which contractually obligates our largest suppliers, like many companies, your top 10 suppliers often make up 80% of your spend. And so those are the ones we're really focused on, is that top percentage, and those include the hyperscalers, that they have to set science-based targets by a certain date, and we've given them tools to do that, to measure and manage their emissions. So it's a legal, contractual, obligatory thing that we set with our customers, and we thought we were going to get a lot of pushback. We were kind of scared to do it. But what I'll say is we got almost zero pushback, and I was amazed at the amount of gratitude we got from these companies and these little sustainability offices that had been trying to get this done in their company, a science-based target, for a long period of time. So we all have to lean on each other and push each other as much as we can.
So I want to make sure we're appreciating a point you made in there about making the AI task fit the AI tool, a right sizing of AI for what you want it to accomplish, if I'm understanding that correctly.
That's right. I mean, I'll give you, there's a number of examples in climate, a lot in education. I'm actually really excited about education and worried they're going to get a little left behind. But there's an organization we funded called Groundswell. And what they do is the poorest folks in this country pay on average about 10 to 15% more in energy costs than the middle and the upper class. And there's a number of barriers there. There's often not solar community projects. There's often lack of education, language barriers around clean energy programs. So this amazing small nonprofit who has such outsized impact is we're helping them build an agent which actually goes out, starting with outreach to the families that can benefit from existing programs that they don't even know about in their neighborhood, using translation services. There's many need in many underserved communities. And then they're going through the process with them about how to subscribe to these clean energy programs, how to advocate for their building, how to, what organizations to get involved with to build community solar. And this is all being done through AI. There's no, there's a person, obviously, who's been training the model and managing it, but in that case, they don't need to know anything about cancer treatment. But what they need to know a lot about is local community renewable energy projects.
Thank you. Priya, you have done some really important research trying to shed light on the energy use and energy requirements for AI, for large language models, how much juice data centers are really using. Give us some highlights from that research and maybe share something that really stands out to you from that work.
Awesome. So yeah, hi everyone. I'm Priya Donti. I'm an assistant professor at MIT, where my research focuses on actually ways to use AI to better optimize power grids to allow us to actually balance power grids in the face of time-varying renewables. And I also am one of the co-founders of Climate Change AI, which is a nonprofit that aims to support the community kind of leveraging AI for climate change related work, as well as align kind of the broader use of AI, what I'll call the business as usual use of AI with climate change goals. And so some of the work that we've done has been focusing on when we ask this question about is AI a hero or a villain, what does that question actually even mean? So there are lots of ways that AI can be used to actually enable climate action, right? From helping us do things like better forecast solar power on power grids to actually help us manage the power grids more effectively, or optimize heating and cooling systems in buildings in order to enable those buildings to be more energy efficient, or help us monitor flooding, climate-induced flooding in real time in Fiji in order to help us actually adapt to the effects of climate change and enable kind of more targeted efforts to kind of help farmers who are affected by those floods actually recover, to doing things like accelerating the discovery of next generation technologies like better batteries. So that's one thing, right? AI can be good. AI can be bad, and we've talked about, I think, already on the panel, right, a kind of various ways in which we are seeing AI be a driver of energy use in data centers, water, and so forth. But what I think often gets left out of the conversation is also the fact that those aren't the only two aspects, right? AI is used for good things. AI has energy use. AI also is used for bad things, and I think it's really important to, in this narrative, really then distinguish between these concepts of waste and efficiency, which are often conflated, right? Waste is, are we doing something frivolous that our energy consumption is not going to be useful about? Efficiency is we've identified something we actually usefully want to do. How do we do that as effectively as possible? And I think Suzanne gave some really great examples of, we identified a problem in healthcare we want to solve. We've identified a problem in climate we want to solve. How do we do that as effectively as possible? But I think we also need to be talking about waste, which is to say we also have to be thinking about, are the things that we're using AI for actually effective or actually useful? And usefulness is in the eye of the beholder, right? Depending on who you're talking to, usefulness might be making profit. Usefulness might be solving a societal issue. Usefulness might be bringing somebody joy. And I think it's really important when thinking about all of this, right? The kind of energy use of AI, the kind of ways that AI is used, to really understand aligning the use of AI with climate action means really critically thinking about what we're using it for, who is making those decisions, and where is that kind of decision maker's incentive aligned or misaligned with our notion of societal value and climate action, and how do we realign that as well?
So very good point, several very good points, but one I want to pull out a bit is, what are we applying the AI to? We're going to hear a lot of examples of advancing clean energy and clean technology, but an early application of AI was also to find more oil and gas to drill, which, hey, we need oil and gas, but not exactly in the climate hero category for most people. So thank you for that. But so in your role with Climate Change AI, you're, as you mentioned, supporting these projects. Give me a sense of what you think is most exciting or has the most potential in terms of advancing clean energy, clean tech.
Yeah, so I think there are two angles to this question. So one is kind of, who is doing on the ground work in climate that could really be supported in some useful way by AI? That's not every single climate change related application, but we're seeing work on things like helping to better direct how shrimp aquaculture by kind of identifying sites that could benefit from changed farming practices, where you basically shift one part of the aquaculture site to be more farming intensive, so you can actually focus the other half to be more focused on mangrove preservation. And that way, you're actually kind of, kind of benefiting climate, right, by both allowing kind of better sequestration potential because you've enabled more mangroves, and then you've also kind of improved kind of flood resilience in the place where you're doing that. Identifying those sites is actually a really intensive process, and it's something that can be accelerated using satellite imagery. And there are nonprofits who are working on site identification where there's actually a meaningful accelerator to the work they're doing by taking data we have and using it more effectively. So I think on the ground, there are use cases like this where there's a challenging problem that a climate-related entity is trying to address, where there's some kind of clever use of data, right? And machine learning is just finding patterns in data, right? And so there's some clever use of data and some way to find patterns that can meaningfully accelerate what they're doing. And I think that's really exciting. The other angle is on the research side. So, and Suzanne also got at some of this, that not all AI is LLMs, nor are all LLMs even the same as each other. There are lots of ways to think about the idea that when you're contending with work like I work on the power grid, where you actually have to really care about the fact that the power grid is safe, you're gonna build your AI system really differently than if you were gonna write poetry, where if your poem doesn't rhyme, maybe that's okay. And so the way you do that is you actually write down, for example, the physics of your power grid. You actually maybe embed literally those physical equations within your AI or machine learning model, and then you get your model to learn from data to supplement that. And now you have something that's much more data efficient, that's actually taking advantage of the knowledge you have on the ground and is usefully kind of moving an objective forward. And so I think the other angle to this is I'm really excited about kind of continuing to further research in AI, but in a way that is really driven by the needs of what we need for climate on the ground, because the way you develop AI looks different if you're focused on those use cases rather than use cases that may be not as societally beneficial.
So Amin, this is your area of focus as well, especially right now, as I'm guessing you're sifting through 1,000 entries in the contest, something like that. So in your role with Bezos Earth Fund, you're sponsoring the Grand Challenge on AI Grand Challenge for Climate and Biodiversity, correct?
Climate and Nature.
Climate and Nature, thank you. So first of all, why did Bezos decide to put $100 million into this contest of the range of Earth Fund things where that money could go? Why was that a priority?
Yeah, so a couple of things. One is we didn't come up with this idea and then implemented. We started with conversations, right? Early on, we sat down with Columbia University's climate school and talked to them about the work that they were doing and what they would like to see in this space. And I'll rewind for a second and also say, when you think about philanthropy, you really need to think about the role that philanthropy can play versus the role that government plays, the role that the markets and private sector play, and then the role that academia plays. And philanthropy has to find its space. And that's a non-trivial thing to do. And so we went on this sort of walk to figure out what role can philanthropy play. One, we don't want to step on anyone else's toes, but then two, government has way more money than the Earth Fund and so on and so forth. And so one, we went on that walk. And so we started these conversations. We actually partnered with Columbia University and SUNY Albany and Esri to do a full report, a full landscape assessment of the work that's being done in AI in the climate and nature space. We actually reached out to CCAI because they're a really amazing organization in this space, and also talked to them about we commissioned them to do a report on the landscape of grand challenges and who's been doing grand challenges and where have grand challenges been successful and unsuccessful, right? So we really painstakingly look for where we can play a really key role, and we figured that $100 million would be a great start, one. And it's a 3-round program, but we wanted to understand, we didn't want to fund AI work. We wanted to actually fund climate and nature work. And so we thought about it from the standpoint of, we have this sort of very reductive way of thinking about this. There's suppliers and then there's demanders, right? The demanders are your climate and nature organizations, your nature serves, your block powers, your epics that are on the ground doing the work, day in and day out and have been doing the work. Your suppliers are your AI organizations that have a technology that understand AI. And really what we wanted to fund with the Grand Challenge was bringing the suppliers and the demanders together, and we funded that work for them to come together to do amazing stuff. So we did a lot of work to get to this understanding of where philanthropy can really play a role and move the space, and we think we landed in a nice sweet spot.
So you put out the call for entries,
Yeah.
the deadline's passed for
Yeah.
the first round, you're sifting through them. Can you give us a sense of what you find exciting there without giving away the winner? If you want to give away the winner, go right ahead. We like to make news, it's in our name. But no, give us a sense of what you've come across that raised your eyebrows.
I cannot, but what I will say, what I will say is, one of the things that's important to us is, over the Climate Week, you hear a lot about monitoring and measurement, right? And one of the things that we think about is monitoring and measurement for impact. And so what has helped us think through, so one of my favorite examples is, and I saw this really great documentary, some of you may have seen it, I think it's still on YouTube, I think the Discovery Channel did it on pythons in Everglades, right? And this invasive species that's in the Everglades and why it's so difficult and such a complex thing to get them out of the Everglades. And so what you'll hear, a lot of people do projects that say, well, we'll use, satellite imagery and AI deep learning to identify where the pythons are. But for us, we're far less interested in understanding where the pythons are, but more interested in understanding where they are such that we can facilitate the organizations that would normally go in. And if you've seen the documentary, it's a fairly non-trivial thing. Even if you know where they are, you got to go in at a certain time, and there's only a small amount of people who know how to do it. If by the end of this project, you haven't 5x, 10x your normal operations through this work, that's uninteresting, right? We're not interested in understanding where things are and measuring things anymore. We're more interested in measuring and monitoring for driving impact. And so that has been very interesting for us as we're working with expert judges and expert panelists to go through the over 1,200 submissions. We're looking for a clear statement of, in 2 years, thanks to AI, we would have 5x to 10x this work that we're doing.
Mm-hmm. So AI is not going to help us find the answer. It's going to help us scale up the answers that are already out there, the proverbial silver buckshot that we talk about with climate solutions.
Absolutely. That's important because it's important to understand that there are organizations who have been on the ground for decades upon decades doing this work. AI isn't this new technology that's going to solve everybody's problems. The organizations have been solving them. We're using AI to scale and to facilitate 5x, 10x implementation.
Great. Bobby, back to you. This is something you touched on earlier, but I want to make sure we talk about it in a fulsome way, and that is the efficiency gains that we can expect or try to work toward for data centers. Without getting into too much detail, because I'm sure this gets really technical really fast, but for a lay audience, what do you find most promising in terms of trying to bring down the energy consumption in data centers?
So the fact of the matter is that every organization, big tech or small tech, every single part of the value chain, when you're looking at a data center, is focused on how do you reduce the consumption. That's just basic economics. You don't want to consume any more than you have to. And now it's also driven by sort of timeline, time to market, and the need to meet the current energy requirement that we have in a specific location. And so working with utility partners, we try to find the opportunities to have efficiency at the substation, to have efficiency from the substation into the data center. How do you reduce every single component so you have the absolute minimal amount of line losses every step of the way? We talked about how AI can be deployed in sort of every part of the value chain on energy. I think it's really important to recognize if you look at some of the EIA data, you've still got a huge amount of energy that's just wasted. Whether it's line losses, whether it's reserve margins, things that AI can really help to solve. So it's all very circular into some of the efficiencies that you can get. We can work with utilities to find some of those solutions. We're also looking to find, obviously, like how do you get the servers to do more with less? And so that's one of the things that far smarter people than me are focused on, is how do you take those servers and make sure that they are doing as much compute, as much of the time as they can to get the answers that we need, that we're doing the most valuable types of models that are possible with that actual information, and spitting out answers and getting to actual output that makes sense from the standpoint of what the servers can do and what they're able to do. Not having idle servers is ultimately what I think everyone wants to see, because idle usage, if it's consuming energy, is not ideal from any part of the equation. And so finding the ways to make sure that AI models use the servers as efficiently as possible, that's a conversation that companies like ours are having. That's a company, when you look at companies that are deploying the servers, that are really building those models, that's what they're focused on. That's where their competitive edge comes from, is how do you get those servers to do more with less energy consumption?
And Heather, I'm guessing this is appealing to you as well, if you can meet the energy demand without having them pulling down quite so much energy. Talk to me a little bit about how you see AI being applied to helping Duke manage its problems, whether it's increasing efficiency or the alignment of the intermittent nature of renewable energy that Priya mentioned earlier.
So we've been using AI, leveraging its capabilities since 2017 in our operations. It helps make us more efficient, as you noted. We've been using it for leak detection and faulty meters, energy theft, all the way to plant maintenance and storm detection and outage maintenance. So it's benefited us, it's benefited our customers. And again, this goes back to our customers, which is the balanced pace of change that we need for the clean energy transition. To meet that net zero 2050 goal is going to require lots of tools in the toolkit. Additionally, for our customers, it's got to be affordable and reliable, as well as clean energy that we're providing them. And that affordability piece, that energy efficiency piece, is top of mind.
Suzanne, I know that you've also been looking at AI applications in the sustainability realm. If I recall correctly, you've conducted a survey of sustainability officers, and what did you learn from that in terms of how they're finding AI applications useful?
Well, I think that the use case around energy efficiency that came out top of the list. And, I'll just give you a personal example, because I feel like use cases sort of say everything, which is, the product that we have, we call it Net Zero Cloud. One of the things that it made the invisible visible for somebody like me, who's in charge of our net zero targets, was, real estate. So there's only a certain amount of things in our control, our real estate, our corporate travel, et cetera. And I looked at, when I got the first dashboards, which was super cool, because for the first time we were getting them in a real-time way versus looking at energy bills like 30, 60 days ago. There was like a red dot in Boulder, Colorado. Terribly performing building. We don't own our buildings for the most part. We're tenants, just like many of you. And I said, what? First of all, I said, we have an office in Boulder, Colorado. Like, I didn't know that. And also I went to college in Boulder, Colorado, and there cannot be like a more granola town in, this country. And how on earth is it our worst performing building? And so when we kind of dug into that, we saw, okay, Colorado grid is not as clean as you would think in many areas because of the history of mining and coal use, et cetera. Second of all, the building was an old building and it hadn't been retrofitted, everything from windows to insulation. And so what we were able to do is go to all the other tenants in the building, and we didn't have even all that much space, maybe a third of the building. And there was maybe 7 or 8 other tenants. And we went to the landlord and we sort of made a case for, if they put a certain amount of money into renovating the building, they could, save on their own energy costs and also help get some of us residents in there closer to our net zero goals. Sort of a micro example, but what it showed in the energy efficiency is that you can get data, but what matters is then what do you do with that data? And so that was sort of a cool example. And so that's, we have hundreds of customers on this product. So you take that and you look at that at scale. These are these massive enterprises. So I think that's the power of the collective, and that's the power of what AI can sort of inform around sort of taking action.
Priya, I want to come back to you for a couple of, let's call them rebuttal points here. First of all, what do you think of the notion of efficiency as the solution to addressing energy use by data centers? Is that going to solve things for us?
Yeah, and I think I got at this at the beginning, right? I think efficiency is super, super important, but efficiency is not the same as waste. We really need to think about what we are using any kind of technology, right, like any emissions spend for, and kind of figure out if that's something we actually want to be spending emissions on as a society. And that is a problem that, again, kind of requires thinking about where might incentives be misaligned between the kind of spenders of the emissions and sort of the kind of public benefit or kind of public need for those applications. And yeah, we should examine that.
Is there the risk, you think, that because it's more efficient, we're going to put it to greater use and we're going to end up burning as much power?
I mean, yes, right, and this is the Jevons paradox, which basically you make something more efficient, as a result it also becomes cheaper to use and you use more of it. And so I think these are all phenomena that kind of, in some sense, are not new, right? We've sort of seen this with information and communication technologies as a whole, but it's something that we have to think about. And exactly, it's that you have to think about the kind of life cycle all the way through kind of expenditure through use. And actually, one thing I'd say is we focused a lot on energy, but there are water implications, there are siting implications, and sort of land competition implications. And sometimes when you put a data center in a place that has the cleanest energy, that might be hydro, or which might have kind of other uses in the region. It might be that you're putting something in a place where it's actually water scarce. The energy is clean, but the water is scarce, and that's competing with local uses for the water. So there are lots of, I think, kind of materiality considerations, environmental justice considerations. It's important that we actually also think about this holistically and don't just kind of optimize along a single narrow axis of energy as well.
And one more question for you, Priya. Do you find in your research that you are getting the kind of data that you need to really fully assess how much energy these large language models, et cetera, are using?
No, not at all. And so I think that part of the reason the beast seems so scary is because the nature of the beast is, I think, not necessarily yet that well known. I think there are individual entities who are measuring, for example, the energy use that comes from specific technologies that they may be deploying internally, be that AI, be that other technologies, and maybe have a good sense of the dynamics and trends associated with that. And there have been really helpful papers in this space. For example, Facebook put out a paper at some point which really elucidated this idea that new models are shifting. Before you actually would see, when you're actually creating a model, training a model, that's more energy intensive, but you do that fewer times. Mm-hmm. And when you use a model, that's less energy intensive, but you do it much more. And before, when you were actually training smaller models, in reality, your kind of emissions that were spent from training were similar to the emissions that were spent from use, because the number of uses, the balance between how many times you used a model after you trained it. Now, larger models, they're both more expensive to train, but they're actually also a bit more expensive to use. And each use, each time I query something like GPT, that's actually multiple, kind of from a technical perspective, inferences, so multiple what we would call uses in the back end of a model. So actually each consumer-facing use of a model is multiple inferences, and that's actually shifted the balance where actually now inference use is taking more energy and emissions than training. So these kinds of dynamics are actually really hard to understand if you don't have transparent access to data about the uses, and then it means that you don't know what to do, right? Because these and you also don't know what the growth patterns might look like if you don't have access to this data for dynamics and trends. And so I think further transparency and data sharing from multiple entities on these kinds of things are going to be really instrumental in figuring out what to do.
So there's a piece of legislation pending in Congress. I think the full name is the AI Environment Impact Act. They might want to work on being more pithy, I don't know. But is that a potential solution to this transparency and disclosure issue?
Absolutely, and so yes, Senator Markey's office in Massachusetts kind of put forward this bill, and what's really exciting to me about it is it really thinks, again, holistically about how do we conceptualize the use of AI as being good or bad with respect to its applications and its energy usage, and kind of tries to empower the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency as well as NIST to actually develop standards around how we actually measure and report on this. And some of these things are quantitative, right? So I can kind of in a very targeted way measure how much is my kind of energy draw in a data center. Some of it is qualitative. If you're going to use AI to kind of, help somebody with flood adaptation, or you're going to use AI for a bad application like, like targeted advertising and increasing consumption, it's much harder to actually pinpoint the exact emissions number associated with that, but you still kind of know what's going on. And so what I like about that bill is it really tries to get at how do we get at those numbers in a targeted way that we have the ability to measure and know what it means to report on those well, so set standards, as well as how do we actually write down what we can't quantify but shouldn't ignore for that reason, and that way we can, again, think about the issue holistically.
Is there support on this stage for that move to transparency? Is there support for that particular legislation, perhaps? Suzanne?
Well, I mean, there's nobody I love more than Senator Markey. He's amazing. I spent some time with him recently. There's a way to go with that particular legislation, in my personal opinion, and we need some more bipartisan support there. That said, transparency is critical, and you sort of can't manage what you don't measure and or be accountable for that. And like when the SEC ruling came, which we'll see if it actually gets passed or not, we were very vocal about our support for that bill. So I think that we've got to get transparency is paramount. It builds trust.
Aman, your thoughts? Would that legislation advance the area that you study?
Well, I think to Priya's point, and we did actually support some work that AI2 with climate change AI did with the bill and sort of engaging folks in DC and on the Hill on it. I will say that where we live is, Priya referenced it as the inference side. That's the users of the data centers, and we're really trying to grow that. And so I think we want to be conscious of the use there as well. So we want to walk and chew gum at the same time, understand the use, but also grow the usership. So we're in that space for sure.
Bobby, what's Microsoft's view of that legislation?
I mean, I cannot speak to the specific legislation, but to the notion of transparency, we're very transparent with our reporting, sort of what our consumption looks like. I think one thing that I would kind of draw a distinction to is the fact that AI workloads, whether it's inferencing or training, cloud workloads, especially for a company like Microsoft, we work with customers from every part of the entire economic sector. And one thing that's a little bit disconcerting is having someone potentially make a value judgment about what is the good use versus the bad use, because I think that is in the eye of the beholder. And so how you look at that particular element, I think those of us on the stage, for instance, would say getting utilities to do better grid management and look at distributed resources in a specific way would be a great thing, and would hope that nobody would disagree. I suspect you could probably talk to somebody and find somebody who would disagree. And so that notion of trying to make a value judgment of whether it's a good use of the megawatts and megawatt hours or whether it's a bad use, and especially to put that into a reporting obligation, I think creates some real some real issues, especially as we are looking at like how we enable customers at every level, whether it's a small shop or whether it's a large company, to find ways of using this tool in ways that they think is beneficial and not making that value judgment about how they actually deploy it.
Thank you. So we're about out of time, but there is one very important question that we haven't yet addressed, and that is the title question of this panel discussion. So I'm going to go down the line here, starting with you, Suzanne. Hero or villain?
100% hero.
100% hero.
Yeah, and I've been spending a lot of time at Climate Week with the entrepreneurs that are building solutions. So there's a lot of problems out there, but there's a lot of people working on really innovative solutions. So I'm really hopeful.
Thank you. Heather?
So we take a pragmatic approach to AI. We both use it in our operations, but we understand the significant load growth that it brings. And so I'll just go back to, we've talked a lot about generation, right? Our balanced pace of change for affordability and reliability to manage our customers' needs. But we also need a kind of an all-of-the-above approach to generation, right? Nuclear and renewables and transitioning off coal with our coal goals, et cetera. And I think we haven't talked enough about transmission. So that's the backbone for our grid. We operate 300,000 miles of T&D, transmission distribution infrastructure, and helping us prepare that grid to be more resilient to physical climate risks and weather risks, right? Improving reliability on it, increasing two-way flows of communication so customers can talk to customers with their energy flow. That's essential to evolving the grid, which helps us get there.
So is that a hero or a villain? Sorry.
A little bit of both.
A little bit of both. That's a good answer. There we go. Priya?
AI isn't the agent in this equation. People and organizations are. AI is an accelerator of what we do across society. If we're serious about fighting climate change, AI will be a hero. If we're not, it's going to be a villain.
Yeah.
Spoken like a true academic. There we go.
Yeah.
Bobby, where do you weigh in on this?
Yeah, probably shocking, but I definitely think it's a hero. And I think from a climate perspective, one thing we kind of have alluded to, but when you're talking about energy, whether it's distributed resources or transmission, all the things, it's such a data-intensive sector that you can't really see any place that AI can be so immediately impactful in ways that we're talking about with dynamic loads and with distributed resources. But the other part of what was alluded to already on the stage is we're entering a whole new realm as far as climate impacts. And that's really where you can see where it's going to be a hero for society as a whole. When you look at wildfire mitigation, when you look at storm impacts, when you look at the things that really are going to impact every human being on this planet, that's where you see AI as a tool that literally can save lives.
Great point. Thank you. Amin, I've saved you for last because we've had this conversation before.
Yeah.
Hero or villain?
So you asked me that question and my PR and comms training kicked in, and I sort of blurted out something that I paid attention to a lot of my life, which is this concept that Joseph Campbell created called a framework called the hero's journey. And a lot of our favorite movies follow this framework. You know, Star Wars, Lion King, Lord of the Rings, almost every Marvel movie, and the hero goes on this journey. And in this case, again, the hero is not AI. The hero are the organizations, but those organizations are on a journey. And the AI is the mechanism. If you look at any of these stories that I talked to you about, there's this capability that the hero takes on, whether it's Luke Skywalker with the lightsaber, or Frodo with the ring, so on and so forth. There's this capability that they take on, and what we're doing at the Basel Surf Fund is providing that capability, working with these organizations, providing them that AI capability, so that those organizations and those entities can take that hero's journey. And the grand challenge, when you look at the hero's journey framework, it always starts with the call. Right? The call to action for the hero. And so these sorts of gatherings are that call to action. The question is, will AI step up and play the role that it should play and it can play with these organizations so that they can traverse that hero's journey and ultimately do what they were born to do, which is sort of solve a lot of these climate and nature issues. So we're on the hero's journey, and I think we're all involved in that hero's journey, whether we want to or not, on a stage, off the stage, and so we'll see where it ends.
Super. No better place to wrap up than on that point. Thank you all so very much. Stay with us for just a bit. We're going to take a few questions from the audience. So we ran over just a little bit because that's what I like to do. But we do have time for some questions, and I hope we have some excellent questions from this excellent group of guests. We have two folks with microphones. I can't really see because of the lights, but they're around here. But I will look for hands for anyone who has questions for our panelists. Yes, sir. Oh, just a moment and we'll get a microphone to you.
Hi, this is a message for you, Priya, MIT. Talk to us a little bit more about the work that CSAIL is doing. I think that, you're part of that group, right?
No, actually, but I do know, yeah, so I'm part of LIDS, a different lab, but same boat.
So I think it's important to expand upon the bigger picture of what MIT's importance is in the artificial intelligence space and the work that CSAIL is doing and, Marvin Minsky and all of that. It might be interesting for the audience to maybe touch upon what is coming out of there with liquid AI and so on.
Sure. So, I think that, okay, so one of the things there's a lot I could talk about MIT and AI, but actually one thing I'm very excited about is the MIT recently created an entity called the Schwarzman College of Computing, which is really focused in many ways on thinking about these kind of uses of AI for different kind of action areas across society. So AI for climate, AI for health, and so forth. And so what you see actually in this context is, again, this idea of use-driven innovation, kind of methods that are innovative because they're actually addressing a particular challenge that is faced on the ground. So things like Sarah Beery at MIT, who is doing AI for biodiversity and conservation, where her work really thinks a lot about the fact that when you have observations of species, there's some species you see a lot, and there's some species you see very little, and this creates a big skew in kind of the data that you get. Because actually what you're interested in predicting is where are the species that are scarce? I don't need to know where the species that are abundant, I know where they are. And so a lot of really cool stuff there and kind of developing AI methods that kind of by leveraging kind of, information that we actually have about biodiversity as well as kind of improved techniques can deal with these issues of kind of what we call like out of distribution generalization, distribution shift, basically looking kind of beyond the main picture that the data is telling you and trying to kind of extrapolate to something outside of that. And so then there's also, I think, some very cool work coming out of kind of the lab of Abigail Butner, who works on machine learning for kind of ocean dynamics, and they really think a lot about kind of how do you, when you have these kind of models that you actually have physical models that can model the ocean, but you don't have kind of sufficient resolution in terms of what's actually going on because these models are computationally expensive to run. How do you actually take some of the physics you care about but then approximate some of the other physics with a machine learning model and get these kind of physics-informed methods that are much faster to run and give you much more granular insight. So I think these are some of the kinds of things that I think are really exciting and where, again, there's some kind of particular challenge that a climate-related use case is surfacing that the methods are being developed to address.
Thanks for the question. I think I saw a hand toward the back. There we go, yes.
I have so many questions about Pythons now. I'd love to hear comments around kind of the social sustainability and social equity side of this conversation. As I think about a hero or a villain journey, we've talked a lot about the impact that AI will have on environmental consumption, but where's your perspective on what it's actually doing from a societal perspective? We've heard a lot throughout the week around bias and kind of implicit challenges underneath the data and the various layers, but how are you all thinking about the social elements of this conversation?
Is there someone in particular we want to direct this to, or is that open for the panel?
Dealer's choice.
A dealer's choice.
I'll start.
Okay.
Just as one example, because I think people think about equity in a lot of different ways. One what I don't want to have happen is the next digital divide, where educators, public schools, nonprofits don't have access to this technology. So we're doing a lot of work in this area, and there is a lot of potential that's amazing. And a super quick example is a group that we work with called College Possible, that in this country, that on average there's one college counselor to 250 students. And that is an unsustainable load to be able to get anything done in the public schools. In California, by the way, it's 1 to 500. So they've built this agent, we've been working with them on this agent layer that basically empowers the college counselor to use AI to give kids assignments, and they actually have a really cool app that actually says, like, this is my GPA, this is where the region that I'm interested in, this is the size of the school, this I need financial aid. And then it gives them something to go into the college counselor with in advance that's super targeted. And that, you know, is kind of breaking down this system where the public schools are overloaded. But that is the rarity. When we pull together public school teachers, which we do often, and we've been running these AI and education summits, they don't know how to use it. They don't have policies yet in their school. So when I think about equity and access, I'm really like, how can we all lean in to not create this next digital divide of the haves and the have-nots?
And I'll jump in on social impact for us is all part of the clean energy transition. So we've talked about transitioning off coal into other fuels as we're developing through the 2030s, bringing on zero-emitting, load-following resources, ZELFRs for short. These are the new technology, hydrogen blending gas, advanced nuclear, small modular reactors. For us, it's back to just transition and thinking about our communities, where we live, work, and play, right? These are our customers, our communities. So we think about just transition and transitioning fossil fuel assets and what will be next for the resources for that community. So think about employee transition, training, reskilling, retooling, thinking about the community and the customers. For some cases, we've been in those communities for decades, and that's an opportunity for us to work with our customers and communities.
Well, thank you for the plug for the just transition. I'm a West Virginia boy, and that's a big deal in the place where I grew up.
It's a big deal.
Thank you for mentioning that. Aman?
So I'll just add that, you know, again, at the Earth Fund, our work is really on growing the number of organizations that can ultimately build solutions using AI. When you think about the hyperscalers, there's a very limited number there. When you think about the organizations that could actually build solutions on top of these data centers, that's almost infinite, right? Like, it can go on and on and on. And then the question is, how do you ensure that you have a very inclusive process by which organizations can come up with really amazing ideas who don't have access to this technology, but then bring them access to this technology? When you look at our grand challenge, it's in 2 phases. The first phase is literally a 1 to 2 page submission, just a big idea. We're not asking for you to be MIT, no offense to MIT, but you don't have to be MIT, you don't have to be Berkeley, you don't have to be Stanford. You just have to have existed and saw challenges in your community, in your space, and have a solution. Doesn't have to be AI ready, just has to be a solution. And you can submit to the grand challenge, and we actually have an innovation sprint that will walk you through partnering you with those AI suppliers so that you can build these AI solutions. And so one of the things is, how are we far more inclusive than we've ever been? I came to the Bezos from NVIDIA, and I can tell you that we weren't thinking in a targeted way on who would be using the technology. We knew a lot of people would, but we now have to be far more precise and clear on making sure many folks who are suffering the challenges are also part of the solutions, the AI solutions. And that, you have to be deliberate about that.
Thank you. Any other takers on that question? Or?
I'll join into that one, which is, I think you've already heard the sentiment, and I will just echo it. When we look at it from the Microsoft perspective, we want to be sure that AI is truly democratized, including the global south. It's like a global issue, and it's global reach that we are focused on. So making sure that there is a true opportunity globally in every part of every country to really avail themselves of what we think is a very powerful and impactful tool. And then on the other side of the equation, you heard it from the energy perspective, is making sure that the cost elements, that we look at the true full societal benefits and costs that are being incurred, whether it's water resources or energy resources, how we deploy them and how we actually find opportunities. We did a project with Pivot Energy to really find distributed energy resources that line up to what we're doing and put them into parts of the economy and parts of underrepresented participants within the distributed energy community that makes sense for us. And that's an opportunity that companies like Microsoft can avail themselves of. We can partner with utilities, we can partner with regulators and policymakers, but it's really taking our voice, whether it's on the AI side or on the energy side, and really finding opportunities to bring everybody into the tent.
Thank you. Let's see, I see a hand here, and we have time.
Hi, this is a question for Priya. You talked about wasteful applications of AI. My question is, who is supposed to do that? If I think about like consumers using ChatGPT, they're not thinking about whether or not asking to write ChatGPT to like write poetry is like beneficial for the climate or not. Bobby, for example, has mentioned that he's unwilling to make value judgments re his customers' applications of AI. So who ultimately should be responsible for culling waste?
Yeah, this is a great question. And I tend to kind of point to cases where maybe organizational or systemic change rather than individual behavior can be targeted through kind of, policy or incentives. So for example, if we are saying that, there's some things that are kind of obvious here, right? Like fossil fuel acceleration, right? Not great. We should make sure that regulation is dealing with that. But there are other things that we're thinking about, like, okay, fast fashion, for example. It's not necessarily that the technology provider is the one that is regulated there, right? It's the fast fashion industry, and that there are kind of emissions targets that user has to meet in order to just be an organization that is allowed to exist in society. And so I think some of these things look a lot like the kinds of carbon caps or sort of mandates for different sectors to bring their emissions down generally look like, and kind of applying that kind of organizational pressure. And that's why my somewhat glib answer, right? It's this idea of, if we're serious about addressing climate change, we're going to have to put policies and other things in place to align organizational mandates and incentives with actually addressing climate goals. And so that kind of thing is what needs to happen.
Others want to weigh in on that? No? Do we have other questions? No? I think we have reached the end of our program.
One more over there.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yes, one more questioner.
Hi, I will caveat all of this with, I also work for MIT, unrelated, but I work for the Institute's Social Impact Initiative. And with that, I would like to ask how you are all sourcing solutions from folks who are proximate to those issues to ensure that the people who are experiencing them have a seat at the table when the table oftentimes isn't made for them. And if you're not, please talk to me because we can help you fix that.
Is that directed to a
also dealer's choice.
Also dealer's choice. Thoughts on that?
I can start.
Yeah, please start.
Oh, sorry.
I'll
Grand
say
challenges, I kind of know where you're going to go with that. So maybe I kind of would love to hear from Suzanne about that, as well as Microsoft and Duke. So I take it back, not dealer's choice.
I probably would have said something different than what you thought I was going to say.
I'm inclined to let Amin answer the question.
Yeah. Well, I think I'm going to say something different than what I think you thought I was going to say. But what I will say is, you can never do enough in this space, and you can never do as well as you have set out to do. And so you have to bring in as many partners as possible. You have to engage with organizations that have been around for decades upon decades to really get into those communities, because it's a fairly interesting back and forth, because you're assuming that those communities want to be engaged or care to be engaged, because they haven't been engaged for so long. I'm from one of those communities, and I know what that looks like when I work for the mayor's office in New York City, and we start up 311, and we go into the community and say, you've got 311, and the community says, leave us alone with this 311 thing, right? And so you can't assume that those communities understand and know and want to be engaged. And so you can always go to bed at night knowing Whatever you did that day to engage that community is not enough. So what are you going to do the next day? And so that's open, for ideas. No one has, not an organization at MIT, not an organization at Howard University, not an organization at BMCC has the solution there. And we just have to keep thinking through.
That hero's journey is sounding very tough. The more you describe this, Suzanne, we'll go to you to weigh in on that, and this will be our final.
I'll keep it short and sweet. We think about it from kind of an industry perspective. So we had our big users conference in San Francisco last week called Dreamforce. We have a lot of our biggest customers there. So we did an energy roundtable. And we brought together our customers that were utilities, and I think Duke was there, and people that are kind of working in the energy space. But we also brought into that breakfast some entrepreneurs that we funded through our ventures portfolio that are working on grid optimization and EV charging issues. So I think that, and then I can take that and I can rinse and repeat in retail. So we try to think about it like, let's connect the entrepreneurs with the customers who need to hear the message, and let's do it by vertical.
Well, briefly, yes.
Ever so briefly, against the clock. We've talked a lot today about commercial and industrial customers, but I think your question gets to the heart of our residential customers. So we try to have the approach of working with communities, listening to our stakeholders as listen, learn, adjust, right? Where we go in, share strategy, share our plans through the integrated resource planning process, a jurisdictional generation planning process that goes on every few years depending on the state that we're talking about, and listen to stakeholders and get their input on our generation plans and adjust as needed.
I want everyone to join me in a big round of applause for our excellent panelists. Thank you so much. And thank all of you.
Great to meet you.
Thank you, man. So good. Yeah, thank you.